all that good as yet. Well, it's still my schoolboy French. I'm somewhat out of place here. I'm an economist, and although many of the things that we discussed this morning and in the discussion we've had so far ring true to me, the way that we discuss the arguments is somewhat different. But I want to pick up on what Michael was saying and really argue the case and explain the key issues that really played a huge role in the referendum campaign that finished just a few weeks ago, on the psychology behind how people voted. I'll talk a little bit about business views. These were important, but I think not decisive in relation to the referendum debate, as Michael has said, was primarily focused on economic issues. Key arguments from the Yes campaign, so the Yes campaign are the nationalists mainly, with 2 or 3 other smaller parties, that an independent Scotland could deliver faster rates of economic growth, so Scotland could be better off. Scotland, as Michael said, has around 97% of UK GDP per head, but that excludes North Sea oil, and it places Scotland pretty much in the middle of the UK distribution. It's a much more affluent society than Wales or Northern Ireland, and a bit more affluent than the north of England, but not as affluent as the south. The No campaign, on the other hand, was completely divided over powers and policy because they represented a spectrum of political opinion. And there was no coherence in its offering. There still is no coherence in its offering. The timetable for finding coherence is incomprehensible in itself. Details of the options, but the options were, as Michael said, to have a formal monetary union. This was one of the unions that the Scottish Government, or the Yes campaign, asserted would happen. The other options were to informally share the pound, Scotland to have its own currency, or Scotland to join the euro. That was at one time the SNP policy. All of the political parties and the civil service rejected the notion of a currency union. So all the London political parties and the London civil service said there will be no currency union. So there was no possible resolution of this. This is the way to understand North Sea oil. There is an assumption in all of the argument that the territorial waters that would normally be assigned to a nation state would be assigned to an independent Scotland, and the dark blue area there would be the area that Scotland would, the continental shelf area that Scotland would inherit, and that has about 95% of total oil reserves in it. It's very volatile, but is in general decline. That's a problem if your public finances are in a bad state. And Scotland's public finances are in pretty bad state. This is how much it gets in income tax. This is how much it gets in payroll taxes. This is how much it gets in sales taxes, VAT. This is how much it gets in other taxes, a mishmash of other things. Corporation tax. And then North Sea oil, which is jumping about. And then this is how much it spends. So always there was this issue about how are you going to fix the deficit. There is a problem that the UK has. How is it going to fix its deficit? But then that was set on one side, and this became an important part of the argument. Border effects, and we had some joint research with a colleague from Catalonia, who looked at the issue of whether trade declines if you put an international border in place. Issue that affected older people who overwhelmingly voted no about pensions. Could their pensions be secured? How would the UK national debt will amount to about £1.6 trillion next year? What share of that would Scotland take? They might be worse off with independence. So looking at all representative selection of adults, they thought their personal tax situation might be worse with independence. They thought their personal pension situation might be worse with independence. And so, however, this was a poll that we did about a year ago. And I think things changed a bit over time. And one of the things we also tried to look at was how psychological traits influence voting intentions. Willingness to take risks. Were people who are willing to take risks more likely to vote yes? The answer, we think, to that question is yes. So this is a scale of 1 to 10 on a standard question about willingness to take risk. And you can see on the vertical scale you've got the probability that people will vote yes, and it just goes up. It goes pretty much straight up. So there's an association between willingness to take risk and willingness to vote yes. Attitudes. Business, by and large, stayed out of it. They did not want to antagonise their customers, especially if the Scottish Government was one of their customers. They didn't want to antagonise their shareholders or their employees. There were some important interventions by business, but by and large, most businesses tended to stay out of it. The Confederation of British Industry got involved on the no side and suffered heavily as a result of that. The most opposition came from the financial sector, which is a very big sector in Scotland, because it relies very much on an interaction between it and London, and it wasn't clear what would happen to that relationship. And whereas large states can generate economies of scale, preference heterogeneity is a principal motivating factor for secession, and that's history, that's culture, that's language, and so on. So that's a shorthand term for these kinds of differences that we've been talking about all day, effectively. And on issues like social justice, perhaps to a lesser extent, having the Scottish economy grow faster, they managed to make a lot of telling interventions in the last few weeks, and I think that may have had an important effect on the closeness of the result. Okay, thank you.